Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
All right, Rob Browne here with you on this Tuesday. We are back from Orange Beach, Alabama. Tough to leave that place down there, man. That Gulf Coast seafood, everything down there, just paradise. Absolutely awesome time down there. Met some great folks. Met a great Aggie, Casey Goodjohn, 20-year Marine out there surf fishing Sunday afternoon. Again, just an awesome place to be. We got a great show in store for you today. Johnny Ballpark Franks checks in just a minute from Nashville. I'm telling you what, over 14,000 interviews, more Heisman Trophy interviews than anybody in these here United States of America. A Seminole grad, knows the SEC, the ACC, and the big picture of college football. Let me say something real quick, too. Second segment, Yancy Porter, Rebel Yell Hotline. Listen to Yancy and Chuck Roundsville and the crew coming back in from Orange Beach last night on the Rebel Yell Hotline. You can catch it Monday nights, 6 o'clock on Sports 56, WHBQ in Memphis, and Super Talk Mississippi, which we listened to some of on the way back yesterday. Also, second hour, Jordan Hill checks in. A damn good dog he is from Athens. 24/7 Sports covers Georgia. We'll talk about their matchup. Their first SEC game for everybody this weekend. They will be playing South Carolina between the hedges. And Rodney Orr checks in the fourth segment. Tighter Insider in Tuscaloosa. All right, real quick, a couple of housekeeping notes. The first ever St. Paul Open held October 2nd. That's a Monday with a dinner the night before. Call Michael Jordan, 901-647-3014. They have one team left and a couple of flag sponsorship opportunities. Whether you went to St. Paul, Bishop Burn, OLS, OLPH, Holy Rosary, it doesn't matter. If you're Catholic, great. If not, the Archbishop J. Peter Sarton Scholarship Fund is where all this money goes. You'll have a great time with great people. And also, the Clays for Kids Sporting Clays Tournament coming up Friday, September 22nd at the MSSA, Memphis Sports Shooting Association out in Arlington at the Gun Club. Awesome place to be. This money all goes to support the Ronald McDonald House, which is across the street from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I've been down there before, met with those people, 53 rooms. These families are over across the street at St. Jude all day long. They bring their families and the patients back over there afterwards. They provide all the food, accommodations, and everything. All this money goes toward that. So there are two of the $3,000 teams available and one of the $1,500 teams. What do you get for this? Two four-man shooting teams. Men, women, it doesn't matter. Telling you what, if you're Caroline Baker or Lil Bird, you'll go out there probably outshoot a lot of the men, if not most of them. They have two four-person shooting teams that you get left. So for a $3,000 spot, you get reserved golf carts. Sponsor thank you on social media with your logo. Sponsor logo and website recognized on www.claysforkidsmemphis.com. Sponsor logo displayed at dedicated sporting clays stations, ammunition provided, and also verbal recognition at the tournament. So a lot going on, a lot to cover, and let's get started right now, man, with Johnny Ballpark Franks, who has been back practicing. He is, it used to be the infomercial, Johnny, when we would get home from school in the afternoon when we were kids, the world's most beloved pianist, Richard Clayderman. It's now Johnny Ballpark Franks with that Steinway in the background, which I love the background, but how the hell are you? And I tell you, Chief Osceola has got to be happy with what's happening, because I'll let you take that storm. But when you do what you did to LSU and then you take on another good team the next week and you do what you did, Gene Deckerhoff, let's go.
Hey, it's always a good thing when your third string for your team is in the game in the third quarter.
Yeah.
Everybody, when you look at these games like a Florida State Southern Miss, just like we saw Tennessee and Austin Peay. Tennessee-Austin Peay was an ugly game. I mean, 13-6 at halftime. And eventually Tennessee pulls away and wins 30-13. You expect maybe some letdown games in week 2 if you're Florida State coming off a huge win against LSU and you follow that up with a game against Southern Miss. That was not the case. Florida State played like they were supposed to play, executed well, and cruised to that win over Southern Miss. And that's exactly what you want to see. And, Florida State so far looks like the real deal.
Yeah. When Southern Miss, and we talk a lot with David Schultz, who does the Locked On Sunbelt podcast, and other people, the Fighting Will Halls. They're a good team. They're getting better. And for Florida State to do that, just how good do you think this team is? I know I watched Mike Norvell build Memphis up. And when he went to Florida State, I said, it's going to take him a couple of years. He didn't get the job because things were in great shape there.
Yeah, I have Florida State playing Alabama for the national championship. Florida State's that good to me. And there's nothing about Florida State that I have seen, so far in these first 2 weeks, nothing that I've seen so far that tells me otherwise, that they're not one of the 4 best teams in the country. Look, they did great things as far as recruiting well, as far as the traditional routes, as far as, high school students, JUCO. They did a great job of keeping their own talent on campus there in Tallahassee. But more importantly, they're doing the other parts of it, the transfer portal. They're doing all aspects of it well. And that is why Florida State is in the position that they find themselves in. Same thing can be said about Colorado. Duke doing an excellent job in all aspects from a recruiting standpoint. And that is the new brand of college football. Like it or not, if you're Dabo Swinney, if you're Nick Saban, you have to adjust. You have to be able to do it well and all. So it doesn't matter if you've got the number 1 recruiting class. Guess who had the number 1 recruiting class 2 years ago? Texas A&M. How good did they look on Saturday on the road at Miami? Not so much. You're going to have to, if you're going to be successful moving forward, you're going to have to be able to do it in all aspects of college football and be successful with name, image, and likeness. Who has the most money out there to be able to provide players with these type of deals? Texas. Look what Texas has been able to pull off over the last 12 months.
Yeah, and speaking of Texas A&M, met an Aggie, Casey Goodjohn, down at Orange Beach. We were talking, and the frustration that their fan base has, but he's from Claiborne County, Texas, about an hour south of Dallas, and said, hey, give a shout out to Ernest Cronauer, caught a 19-yard touchdown pass from Connor Wigman there. The end of the third quarter, at that time, that game was 31-26, Miami in the lead, and then they go on and win 48-33. Let's talk A&M real quick. They have everything, and every A&M fan I talk to, you've got everything, money, you've got facilities. You're in the most recruiting rich state in America. Is it Jimbo in the culture? Because you had 8-5 is not good enough for what they want at Texas A&M. And now you've got Bobby Petrino. They scored some points the other day, but Miami scored 48.
Yeah, maybe they got the wrong coordinator change. The bottom line is, and one of the reasons why Florida State fans got really, turned off by Jimbo Fisher is because of Jimbo Fisher. He's very stubborn. And look, sometimes you can't change things overnight, and we're still seeing that at Texas A&M. I'm going to say it right now. I understand Auburn had an ugly win against Cal, and you have to be a true Auburn fan, or in my case, growing up in a family of Auburn fans, to have endured. I mean, put it this way, my wife couldn't even stay awake the entire time for that one. But in the bottom line is, if you're going to get an ugly game like that, just find ways to win an ugly game like that. And boy, I was impressed by Auburn's defense. This will be an easy week for Auburn this week with Samford. But I look ahead to next week. I'm not putting that as a check on Texas A&M's part just yet. I mean, that's a type of game where Auburn can actually make an ugly game out of it and find a way to bring down A&M out in College Station.
Yeah,
I don't have a lot of faith in Texas A&M right now.
Yeah, and again, their fans they have everything that you want. It's there. It's the coaching. It just blows my mind. Well, Jackie Sherrill had success. R.C. Slocum had success. They've had it, but it's one double-digit win season in this millennium. That's hard to believe, but I'm with you. We watched that Auburn-Cal game. I think it was over down there around 1:00 Central Time. And all the Eastern guys on my text threads, Auburn, they I don't even know if they remember the end of the game, but it was, I'll take the win. You got to take any win that you get. And looking around in college football, there's a narrative, and it's got a lot of juice behind it, the SEC has really failed miserably in these big matchups so far. And I think it's due, as we discussed on the show yesterday, to a lack of a lot of elite quarterbacks compared to, say, what they have in the Pac-12. But the ACC, this league's looking pretty damn good so far.
So far, and it's still early. And you're right about the quarterback situation. A lot of newcomers as far as taking over these quarterback spots, and it comes in cycles. We go from where we were last year in the SEC with quarterbacks, and we saw it at SEC Media Days. You have Bryce Young, Stetson Bennett. I mean, the list goes on and on. This year, we had probably one of the fewer representations. Every school can bring 3 guys to SEC Media Days, and this was one of the fewer times that we had as far as quarterbacks representing their teams at SEC Media Days, and mainly because we had quarterback battles going on. It's still early, and that's the whole thing. I mean, we look at Alabama's situation. I felt bad for Jalen Milroe. That's not on Jalen Milroe. You don't practice all as far as with your center double clutching as far as on snaps, balls. A lot of these plays are timing routes. And what that means from a fan perspective is that you're expecting a perfect snap. You're dropping back 3 steps and bam, you're hitting your receivers as far as your first read. Well, what happens when the ball is on the ground? Now think about it, 100,000 plus fans out there. It's your team as a starting quarterback. You've already been banged up and you don't trust your offensive line. And now you got to worry about whether or not the football is going to bounce up nicely in your hands so then you can still try to make a play out of it. You're throwing everything totally off. No wonder Jalen Milroe did not look like he was very confident there in the second half. And yes, even when Alabama took the lead against Texas on Saturday night, going in the fourth quarter, when you hold up those 4 fingers like, hey, the fourth quarter is ours, how many folks in the stands holding up those 4 fingers actually felt confident about those 4 fingers up in the air? There was nothing comfortable about that feeling going into those final 15 minutes. But, we've been here before. I go back to 2015. And, Alabama, nothing was going right against Ole Miss. And yet, despite all that, Alabama had the football. Jay Coker with a chance to go down the field. And Jay Coker, by the way, didn't even start that game against Ole Miss at home. Still had the ball in their hands, a touchdown, an extra point away from winning that ball game. They didn't get it done, but what they did get done as they moved on through the season after escaping some other close calls, they ended up winning the national championship. So way early, but the bottom line is now you have your back against the wall. You got to stop reading the press clippings. You got to get back to work and get things corrected. And these are things that can get corrected. I mean, remember Florida State and LSU on Labor Day weekend. Florida State did not look good in the first half, right? So what did they do? Mike Norvell, give him credit and his coaching staff credit. They do one of the better jobs of halftime adjustments. What did they do? They threw the extra running back in the backfield. So instead of just one back, they had 2 backs, totally threw LSU off their game as far as defense, and the rest was history when Florida State ripped off the 31 unanswered points. In this day and age in college football, especially with all the unknowns, we don't know what team chemistry is as far as some of these other teams, and it's still early as far as what you can see on video. You better be able to make adjustments and not be stubborn about it. I thought that Alabama should have put in another quarterback in the second quarter, if nothing else, to take Jalen Milroe off for one series just to get a different look, get regrouped, and even if you put him back in there, at least he has a chance to see what is going on from a different perspective. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes made on Saturday night.
Yeah. Hey, interesting. Here's a question from one of our listeners over up in northwest corner of Arkansas, Al Sherman. Hey, Robert and Johnny, it seems to me that more and more teams are going up for it on 4th down. Is it because of coaches like Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss using the metrics like probability of success in certain 4th down situations? Because I agree with Al. I see it a lot.
Well, I think one of the most important things out there is these coaches understand the importance of each possession. I go back to 2 years ago, the national title game with Alabama and Georgia. Alabama late in the first half had Georgia backed up with all their timeouts. Why are you not trying to get still a extra series there? Get yourself in a position to kick maybe a field goal, if nothing else. You got to be able to buy, extra possessions whenever you can. Remember when Alabama beat Clemson for their national championship in 2015? Remember what they did in that ball game, knowing that each possession mattered. They did an onside kick and recovered it. So that I think what happens is when you've got fourth and a short yardage, why not go forward, especially if you're at midfield? Trust your defense. If you can get yourself another first down, now all of a sudden you get a chance to be in scoring position for a field goal, or even better, keep a drive alive for a touchdown. So thumbs up as far as with that attitude.
Yeah, and Johnny, looking at the big picture, top 25 right now, this year we're going to have the 14 playoff, going in the next year to the 12-team playoff. And I think in November, what we're seeing now, just this revival of interest in college football. I think everybody is fighting, knowing, hey, we may not be in a Power 5 conference now, but the way things are going, we could be. And I think it's given people a lot of hope. But right now, again, it's a 14 playoff. Next year, though, in November, the top 25, most of the teams are going to be saying, hey, we've got a chance to make that playoff. And you're going to see, I'm convinced, a 9-3, 10-2 SEC team get in there, and you'll see it from other conferences as well. Looking at the SEC, Georgia, we don't know how good their offense is.
Right.
With Mike Bobo. We know he was – some of the criticism I hear from people just tells me they're living brain donors. He was a very unpopular hire, no big deal. The 14 years he was with Mark Richt at Georgia, they were pretty damn good. The year he left, not so good when he went to take that job at Colorado State. Todd Monken, hell of a coordinator. Bobo learned some from him, but when you got a defense, Kirby Smart's your head coach, Glenn Schumann as defensive coordinator, along with Will Muschamp, you know your defense is going to be good, but is this going to be a true test for Georgia Saturday between the hedges against South Carolina?
It's interesting because South Carolina struggled against North Carolina week 1, and then North Carolina, you all of a sudden thinking, boy, the ACC in North Carolina, they're really doing a great job. North Carolina was very fortunate that they got a win against Appalachian State, and they were favored by 17.5. One of the things and the trends that I've been seeing over the last 3 or 4 years, because I keep up with these kind of things, teams that are 3 touchdown, 4 touchdown favorites, in a lot of cases, we see this throughout the season. Not only are these teams not covering, these teams are losing to teams that they're favored to beat by 3 or 4 touchdowns. We've already seen it with like what Colorado was able to do against TCU, for example. I think, even though we are still with the 14 playoff this year, expect a lot of chaos still. The Big Ten with Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State. First of all, I think Notre Dame beats Ohio State next week. There's going to be a lot of chaos still. So even if you do lose early right now, don't be shocked to see a 2-loss team in one of these 4 playoff spots. With that said, I expect Georgia to be good at the end. I don't know if anybody's beating Florida State. Am I concerned about the game to Clemson next week? Absolutely. But as long as Florida State plays like Florida State has been able to play so far with that kind of talent, I think Florida State will be undefeated at the end of the year. Georgia's certainly in that position, but you can't. The only problem I have with Georgia, and it even starts with South Carolina, they still have Spencer Rattler. And just when you want to count out a South Carolina, watch them all of a sudden rise up and give a game to Georgia this weekend. But Georgia's biggest problem is that first 7 games of the season, it's kind of easy sailing, and they get some of their tougher games at the end. But can you flip the switch? We saw it all those years with the Atlanta Braves, 14 straight division titles, only 1 World Series. And a lot of it had to do with the fact they had the pennant wrapped up. And then when it was time for playoffs, they were going up against teams that had to fight to the very end to get into the playoffs. And the Braves weren't ready to flip the switch. That's the biggest question I'm going to have about Georgia. It's also the same questions I'm going to have with teams with success. I saw Texas look great against Alabama last year. Probably should have won the game last year at home against Alabama. And other times during the year, I saw Texas look like one of the worst teams in the country. Yeah. So it's not just dealing with adversity when you lose like an Alabama did in the fourth quarter against Texas. It's also teams dealing with successes that they have not experienced in recent years.
Well, let's go back real quick. Remember last year what North Carolina had to go through to get the win I think they played in Boone against Appalachian State,
Right.
63-61.
Yeah.
I think they hit a 3-pointer at the buzzer. I mean, that was, and that's with the Gene Chizik defense. But App State, look, the folks up in Boone, they play good football. They have, Jerry Moore got them going, and my friend Tim Horton coached with him up there for like 9 years. They've got something special in that culture at App State. And that's what we love about college football. And it's easy for you and me to say this as long as it's not our team, getting beat like that. But damn, everywhere you go in Boone, there are pictures of that win opening weekend back in 2007. App State wins at the Big House. So again, the crowds, the enthusiasm are off the charts. More big picture stuff. Tennessee, you talked about it, 13-6 at the half. Listening and watching that game, Tennessee, when we talked about it yesterday on the show, Tennessee's yards per pass are down a little bit this year, but their defense is playing good, and they've got 2 of the top 3 or 4 running backs statistically in the SEC. Let's talk about that matchup Saturday down in the Swamp. They hadn't won down there since 2003.
And I think that comes to an end on Saturday. I do believe Tennessee is the better team, and I think Florida has all types of issues. I had Ben Troop on my show yesterday, and we were talking about this. But I really believe that Tennessee, you're going to have these kind of games. I know fans sometimes don't understand, hey, it's Austin Peay. Why are you struggling against an Austin Peay? It happens. First of all, if you're Tennessee, you're thinking about the bigger picture. You're thinking about Florida. You're thinking about winning the SEC, and you're not always on your A game. But did Tennessee play well enough to win? Absolutely. Play well enough to pull away in the second half? You knew that was going to be the case because they have the better talent. I'm not concerned about Tennessee's performance against Austin Peay. I think they get these things corrected and take care of business coming up this Saturday as far as when they take on the Florida Gators down in Gainesville.
All right, good question here from Samuel Clemens, Huntsville, Alabama. Why did Alabama not pull the center out for a series, not the QB? Good question.
It's because he's the best option. Here's the thing about what I was watching with Alabama's offensive line. Just like I was bringing up what Florida State was able to do when they couldn't contain the defensive pressure that LSU was bringing to the table. They added an extra running back, and the whole complexity of the ball game changed. And Florida State, LSU's defense had no answer for Florida State's running game, and that certainly opened up the passing game. Yeah. I think the same thing applied, especially with left tackle. Are you going to move Latham over to left tackle? As a unit, the offensive line struggled. So you got to find ways to protect and help the offensive line. And give credit to Texas defense. But at the same time, Alabama could have done some things differently to combat what Texas was doing, having the extra running back, providing some help. If you want to go to the left on the strong side, add an extra Alabama, an offensive player there to help with the pass rush. So to me, it was almost like too much pride there and not enough adjustments. And a lot of that can be contributed to the Alabama inconsistency with that coaching staff. The late Bobby Bowden, one of the things he always preached to me about wasn't just being able to recruit the best players in the country. It was also being able to recruit the best coaches in the country as far as part of the staff and being able to retain those coaches. And I think that's when you look at the big picture as far as top to bottom, this might be one of the weaker coaching staffs that Alabama has ever had as far as football is concerned. And I'm not necessarily talking about the coordinators. I'm talking about the complete staff top to bottom. But once again, these things are correctable. It's, look, when you have a center doing the double clutching, and it's a great question, but maybe at the same time, you don't have enough faith in anybody else being able to take over and doing that, especially when you're also, besides being able to snap the ball, my guess is he was more concerned about what's coming at him than necessarily just snapping the ball. And that's from a mental standpoint was why the breakdowns were there. He was forgetting about the basics of snapping the ball correctly. And I think he was more concerned about what Texas was doing with the pass rush.
Yeah. And you look at Texas, we had Ken Capps on with us Friday and Saturday, and Ken was in Tuscaloosa. I felt like if it came down to a quarterback versus quarterback battle, the advantage definitely to Texas with Quinn Ewers. He looks like he's locked in, dialed in, all in for the Longhorns. As the game went on, it just absolutely was obvious that Texas was dominating in the trenches. This is a line of scrimmage league, and Steve Sarkisian,
both sides of the football too.
And I think people also don't discount the importance. To me, the two best defensive line coaches that I'm familiar with in college football are Rodney Garner, who's at Tennessee, and Bo Davis, who's at Texas. When Bo Davis was at Alabama, they were much better. I asked this question. Rodney Orr will be on in the second hour from Tider Insider all the time. Do you have any Marcel Dariuses, any, Ashawn Robinsons? Do you have any Quinnen Williams? No. I mean, they're just, without the great defensive linemen, it's tough to cause a lot of chaos in the trenches.
And I think that's a problem with the inconsistency with the coaching staff. Look, it's not easy being a coach under Nick Saban.
No.
They work a lot of hours.
Yeah.
They work 7 days a week, a lot of weeks throughout the year. And so, when you see opportunities and to work elsewhere, look at other coaching staffs where, yes, they still demand excellence, but they don't necessarily require the kind of hours. That's why it's tough to retain some of these coaches. And that's why you see, yes, Alabama consistently getting one of the top recruiting classes in the country year in and year out. But how much are they getting coached up? How many coaches are they going through? And so at times that, raises this ugly head. I threw this fact out yesterday on my show. Yes, I'm not expecting Alabama having problems this week against South Florida. They're favored by over 30 this week. But guess what happens in 2 Saturdays from now? Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss comes to town. Do you know the last time Alabama was 2-2 to begin a year? Do you know?
I would think it was 2007.
2003, 20 years ago. And Alabama, it was under Mike Shula. They lose to Oklahoma in week 2, the team that was the number 1 team in the country. They only lose by a touchdown. 2 weeks later, they lose to Northern Illinois. They go and start the year 2-4 that particular season. Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing this up, Alabama better get these things corrected, because Ole Miss comes to town in 2 weeks, and Lane Kiffin would love to finally be able to bag the big one and find a way to get a win against Nick Saban in Alabama.
Yeah, and another interesting observation is that the size of Alabama's offensive line, that they were so big that they were having trouble getting off the ball, maybe, or something wasn't right. The chemistry. I mean, on that, and I've really got a lot of respect for Kevin Steele as a defensive coordinator. But Texas looked better. And here's what we keep saying. Now that Texas is in the SEC, their sales pitch to interior defensive linemen is a lot easier than it was to have them playing in the Big 12, running around for these 49, 48 scores, where really the edge rushers were the most valuable players.
I mean, the bottom line is, we've had this conversation before. I'm really amused. I wonder what it would have been like if social media had been around in the 20s, and not the 2020s, the 1920s. Because I go back in history. This is the 3rd time when Alabama's had a very successful coach, and the fans are already saying, you need to retire, need to move on. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe it's the game is, slipping past, because it happened with Wallace Wade. After winning 2 national titles in the mid-1920s, he had a couple of mediocre years, meaning they had 2 losses or 3 losses.
Yeah.
So he played out his contract, or he had worked out a contract to go coach Duke. And what did he do in his final year at Alabama? He won the national championship and then went on to greatness. That's why there's a stadium named after him at Duke. Yeah. Same thing with Bear Bryant, 3 national championships in the 1960s. By the end of the 60s, remember, Coach Bryant would have been around 57 at this point. The game is passed you by. Maybe it's time for the AD, who was also Bear Bryant, to make a change at head coach. What did Alabama do? They switched to the wishbone in 71. So not only was Alabama the team of the decades in the 1960s, they were the team of the decades of the 1970s as well. So this is not the first go around, not the second go around, as far as Alabama thinking that their head coach maybe needs to think about sooner rather than later giving it up. And that's not the majority of the fans, but there's still the dumb fans out there saying these kind of things.
Yeah. One other thing, in 14 and 15, Ole Miss beats them back to back. And I remember there was talk the dynasty was over then. What did Alabama do in 2015? They go win the national championship against Clemson.
And in 2014, they were one of the 4 playoff teams, had a 20-7 lead on Ohio State before blowing that lead against Ohio State, who went on to win the national championship.
Exactly, against Oregon. So, look, people, I think, are so quick to overreact. You call it Overreaction Monday. We tried to tone it down yesterday. We had great guest lineup, of course, and we talked about Alabama and all these schools. And look, I hope you can stay on with us. We're going to take a quick commercial break. I'd love for you to stay on. Yancy Porter is going to join us from Rebel Yell Hotline talking about Ole Miss, who I think has the most impressive victory of any SEC school to this point. That was a hell of a win against Tulane. It doesn't matter if Michael Pratt played or not. Willie Fritz is building a damn good program down there in New Orleans. We'll take a quick break. Be right back. This is Sidelines Tuesday morning.
Red River Ford and Toyota, located in Wynne, Arkansas. If you're in the market for a new or used car, truck, or SUV, call, go online, or drop by and see them. Located 45 minutes from Memphis, go off the 4-city exit on I-40 and go north about 15 minutes on Highway 1. Easy to work with and still believe in customer service. If you live out of town, they will deliver your vehicle to you. RedRiverFordToyota.com. Just see what they can do.
Strengthen your seed zone this spring with quality tillage equipment from House Industries. Located in Cherry Valley, Arkansas, House Industries specializes in manufacturing superior equipment that will minimize your downtime and keep you working in the field. To ensure the highest quality control, all design, fabrication, and testing takes place in a 99,000 square foot manufacturing facility located right here in the heart of the Delta. Locate your nearest House equipment dealer online at houseindustriesinc.com.
House Industries, breaking ground.
Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
Hey, Rob Browne back here with Johnny Ballpark Franks. And another interesting comment from Artemis Powell, one of our listeners, Fairhope, Alabama. The great Sam Pittman, great philosopher, Arkansas football coach, once said, football is one-on-one against one another in the offensive and defensive trenches. It's that simple. If you can't master that, you're going to struggle. So, Johnny, great takes, man, on this big picture. And again, before we go to
I was going to
Yancy,
say, I totally agree with that last statement. In fact, when I start predicting who I think is going to win and compete for conference championships, who's going to compete on the national landscape or in the national landscape as well, I start with the offensive line, defensive line. I don't care how much talent you got at receiver, at running back, at quarterback. If you can't block as far as on the offensive line, if you can't create havoc on the defensive front, that's where I start. I look for returning starters and letter winners at the line, and that's how I start. And I work my way out as far as predicting who's going to have really great seasons in an upcoming season.
Yeah, and it is. It always has been about, it all starts up front. I remember that poster Sports Information Office used to send out back in the 80s at Auburn before it was ruled as an unfair recruiting advantage. And it had Doug Smith for Auburn, big defensive lineman out of Bayboro, North Carolina, the youngest of 14 children. God, he was 6'6", 290. Holy cow, dinner time around there, you must have just go. Back then, you didn't have Costco, but now you would just go to Costco and get some food for him. But you had Dow Altman, Donnie Humphrey, just an incredible group of guys. But it all starts with that surge up front. And, I think that to me, college football, the more it changes, the more it goes back to the basics. And you mentioned about Coach Bryant in the 60s, the late 60s, when they went to substitution rules changed in the late 60s, Johnny, that's when 68, 69, 70, Alabama struggled. And people thought, oh my God, the game has passed Coach Bryant by. He's done. And what did he do? He got with his friend Emery Ballard, and he switched to the wishbone. And everybody watching TV on that Friday night game in 1971 at the Coliseum in Los Angeles, Alabama goes out and lines up in the I formation or whatever they'd been running. But when the game started, they switched to the wishbone. Johnny, I just got to do this for you because it's just one of the great things about college sports. You ready?
I'm ready. My fraternity brothers and I, we were amongst the first 50 fans ever to do the tomahawk chop. We were, the Teeks, Tau Kappa Epsilon, the Teeks of Florida State, the band was trying. And to me, I think it had a lot to do with, Alabama was always doing the roll tide roll at kickoffs and things. And I think it really was, Florida State would do, yeah. That'd be it on a kickoff. It'd be like, okay, something has to give here. Well, the band, the Marching Chiefs, started right in front of our section, the student section there at Florida State. And when I was a student there, we were literally amongst the first 50 fans ever to do that. So very proud of my fellow fraternity brothers.
Yeah, I did. Johnny, that is breaking. I hate to say breaking news because everything on the crawl at the bottom of the screen nowadays is breaking news, but that's a cool story.
It is a cool story. You can only hear
that on Sidelines. That is awesome.
And look, it's documented. So, because, people go, okay, yeah, whatever, because the Chiefs are doing it. The Braves started doing it when Deion started playing baseball for the Braves. Well, we do know what year it happened. And guess who was a student there? So, and things like this happens in the student section. It's not like the old alumni is going to start anything like this. I mean, they were late to the party as far as the wave was concerned. So with all that, I mean, the worst case scenario, I'm amongst the first 5,000. All right. But still, I know I was there, and I can literally say that with full confidence. Less than 100 people as far as the first guys and first individuals ever to do that.
Another really cool bit of trivia about Florida State. When Bobby Bowden came there and they would go on the road, they would play anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere. And they did that, and they would bring back a chunk of turf from the road victory. And isn't there a graveyard outside the stadium of all the turf from those different fields? I mean, that's a cool tradition.
It's between the football stadium and the baseball field. And it's literally a cemetery, and they have the, the markers, and it tells you the date and the score of these games. And it's a cool tradition that's been there for years. And decades. I mean, it's incredible. If you ever get a chance, if you're ever on campus there, whether for a football game or whatever the case may be, make your way over there to see that. I mean, it's really a cool tradition.
Yeah, and I think about this college football, all the great traditions that are out there, and the Seminoles and Chief Osceola on the Renegade, that all this stuff we're seeing. I think people are appreciating it more. And I was listening. When you listen for the shows around the country, college football once, and I think that God was one of our guests last week on the show who said, and I'm trying to go back and see who it was. It was Kevin Skarbinski. It was Saturday morning on the roundtable. Said what's saving college football is game day, and he goes, I'm not talking about the TV show, which is fine, but it's the fans, and it's everybody getting together and just reveling in all this excitement. And I love it. And Yancy Porter's with us right now, and he's still celebrating what we think is the most impressive win, which was at Holman Stadium. A lot of my Ole Miss friends were texting me, and I'm going to tell you what, Yancy, I'm glad that game eventually got played because they were hitting every bar in the quarter on their way to Holman Stadium. And I'm not sure if they remembered the game because I didn't get a lot of texts until after the game. And then I heard they made the fans stay in the game for a long time because they only had one in and out point for the people. But, hey, it is the most impressive win so far for the SEC, period.
Yeah, I bet when you just look at the score, you could say that. If you watch the game, there's some issues with Ole Miss, just like there is with everybody else outside of maybe Georgia. Georgia's started off slow the last couple weeks, but the offensive line for Ole Miss played really, really poorly. They got some issues they got to get fixed. There's no question about it.
Johnny?
Well, I mean, I think that that's the case with you. You can look at everybody always coaches used to look at between week 1 and week 2 looking for improvement. And I think the same thing can be said in today's world when you throw in the transfer portal and everything else, what you think you may have, then you get tested and realize, wait, we've got to change some things. So I think now that new period is week 2 to week 3. So Ole Miss not alone, but watching Ole Miss against Tulane, if I'm Alabama, if I'm a fan of the Crimson Tide, I got some major things that I want to get corrected before Ole Miss comes to town in 2 Saturdays from now. But then again, though, you can say this from the West Coast to East Coast, there's a lot of teams out there, even successful teams, with things that they need to work on.
I mean, that's the story of the SEC this year is that everybody's got issues, and it's wide open. Some teams have more issues than others. So this is really when you're going to see coaching probably at its highest level this season, because the coaches that can expose the other weaknesses for the teams and hide theirs are going to end up being the most successful this season.
Hey, Yancy and Rob, do you believe what I think here is too, where you really at times there's a couple things that work here if you're a coach, and not just the head coach, but as an assistant coach, the things that you there's a part of you that's stubborn, that you believe in the way you do things, but at the same time you have to be open-minded to the point to make the adjustments, maybe do something different than what you were thinking you were going to have to do in week 3. But I think that, to me, will be the difference on these teams making those necessary adjustments and the ones that are too stubborn to make those changes.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. I think that, like you said, you got to be open-minded. You got to be able to maybe make some mid-season changes in what you do, and don't dig your heels in and say, we've done it this way in the past. And that's how we're going to do it now. When that comes to mind, I kind of think of Saban right now.
Right.
With the quarterback situation. I think this is really the first time I've ever truly questioned Saban during his coaching career is going with that quarterback. He kind of went back down to the basics, the roots of Nick Saban, and went with the running quarterback. And he's if he doesn't make a move this weekend, they're in trouble, because this is the week that you make that move. You go ahead, you iron out the wrinkles this weekend with a new quarterback, and then you get into SEC competition next week with Ole Miss, and you kind of know what you got going into the Ole Miss game, and I'm really interested to see what they do with that.
But the problem, Rob, with what he brings up is the fact that Tyler Buckner is too close to Jalen Milroe as far as the way they approach the game. So if he is the true backup, if he's number 2, once again, I go back to the things that I was seeing on Saturday. If I'm a quarterback, I don't know how much confidence I would have. No wonder I'm running out already, because I don't trust the offensive line. I got sacked 4 times. I don't trust the center being able to snap a basic snap back to me, which throws off everything that you're trying to do on offense. It's so easy to pick out Jalen Milroe as the problem. There's other problems that Alabama needs to correct. I don't care who is back there playing quarterback. Kenny Stabler, Joe Namath, anybody could be back there in their prime and would be struggling with what I saw with what that offense was trying to do. And the worst part about this is the fact that these aren't things happening in practice. It's happening in ball games. It's one thing to if you see it in practice and be able to correct games. That's a different issue altogether.
That's true, but I think if you get a good passing quarterback in there, I mean, the kid Simpson from Tennessee.
Simpson is the guy. If you want to make that kind of see, I could buy into that. I think that will be the thing that could be the difference between these 3 quarterbacks. And if you're going to do it, if you want Simpson to perform against Ole Miss, then you might want to see him on the field against South Florida.
No question. You don't want to just start that against Ole Miss. And once you get to a passing quarterback, they're not going to jam the line of scrimmage. You're not going to see as many issues with the offensive line because they're not going to be stacking the box. You're
Good
stacking the
point.
box with Alabama's current quarterback right now because you're going to say beat us with your arm, and
Yeah.
he is a one read guy that's going to tuck it and run, and everybody knows that, and that's just the deal right now.
Yancy, when I watched Ole Miss and Tulane, you just see the importance of having great coaching. Lane Kiffin's quarterback room, it's deep. You got Spencer Sanders, a guy that transferred after 41 starts at Oklahoma State. Walker Howard, a 5-star out of Lafayette. You know about his dad, Jamie, played at LSU. And then Jackson Dart out of Canyon River, Utah or whatever. It doesn't matter who Kiffin puts out there, he can play. But let's switch to the defense. Pete Golding, that's his second game of his defense. He couldn't help but learn a lot over there in 4 years on Nick Saban's staff. What are your thoughts on Golding's Rebel defense?
Well, like I said, all off season, I think the defensive line is the strength of the defense and possibly the team outside of Dart. I think Dart's dynamic there at quarterback, but I think the linebackers are good. They're solid, and the secondary, I'm still a little concerned about the overall unit speed back there, especially a couple of the safeties. But I think Golden made great adjustments there at halftime. Obviously, shutting down Tulane's offense, there in the second half. I believe Tulane had a total of 96 yards in the second half. So, they forced them 3 and outs, all but 2 possessions there. So, Golden, he's a great defensive coordinator, and you can see that by what Alabama's going through now with their defense without him. So there's no question about it. There's some issues there defensively for Ole Miss, though. I really believe. I think as good as that defensive line is, they could get exposed in that secondary if the coaches for the other team draw up the right kind of plan.
I have a different question. This week, is everybody already talking about Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss going into Tuscaloosa next week? Are they already starting that conversation there around in Oxford area, especially with the students?
I'm going to be honest. No, they're not, because right now a lot of Ole Miss fans were kind of eye opener about the weaknesses being exposed against Tulane. I mean, Tulane, they pushed Ole Miss around that first half.
Yeah, you're right. The reason I bring it up because there's Georgia Tech, and I know Georgia Tech is not a national gauntlet or anything like that, but they look feisty against Louisville. Certainly could have knocked off Louisville in week 1 before Louisville had that big play there in the final 4 minutes in the fourth quarter. I guess my point is, if the players are hearing that too much in classes about Alabama and loses their focus against Georgia Tech could beat Ole Miss, especially with what I saw on Saturday. I love the way Ole Miss finished the game, and that's the importance of winning and losing some of these kind of games. But if you're not careful, before Ole Miss takes on Alabama, they could find themselves with an L to Georgia Tech.
No question about it. Georgia Tech should have won that game against Louisville. Obviously, the transfer from A&M coming in there to Georgia Tech at quarterback has really done a lot of good for that team there at Georgia Tech. Them making a midseason change last year. They beat, from a former player at Georgia Tech that got promoted there as the head coach. They beat 3 teams last year that had 9 wins coming down the stretch. So Georgia Tech's been playing, I believe they're 6-4 now since that coaching change. They really hit the portal hard. Their team speed is vastly improved, and Ole Miss has issues. I mean, they're big time dynamic playmaker at wideout. Trey Harris is out. Don't know when he's coming back in. You saw what happened when he went out last week. I believe Ole Miss punted the ball the next 5 possessions. He had 5 TDs in a little over 4 quarters to start the season. He's a first round guy.
He looked good. I mean, I
Yeah,
love watching him play too. I mean, if you haven't seen him play, I mean, I hope that he comes back from Ole Miss's standpoint because I love watching him play.
no doubt about it. And they don't have another one of those there at wide receiver. Judkins has run for a total of 106 yards, averaging uh, a little under 3.8 yards per carry. Last year at this time, he was averaging close to 7 yards a carry. As soon as he gets the ball, the defense is on top of him. They've returned 4 out of their 5 starters on the offensive line, but they brought in a new offensive line coach from NC State. He got rid of the zone blocking and went man on man. And 2 of the 4 starters he put on the bench and is using portal guys that he signed. There's some worries that maybe he's playing favoritism to his recruits, so to speak. And the offensive line's a mess right now. They got some issues. The punting is absolutely atrocious right now for Ole Miss. I don't think I've ever seen a worse punter in 45 years of really following Ole Miss football closely.
Wow.
The guy has no business punting in the SEC. There's issues all around, and so Ole Miss fans are not really peeping towards Alabama, so to speak. They're ready to see this weekend if they're going to fix some of these issues.
And see, this is where I was going to say, Rob, this is one of these things where, you know, everybody moved towards spread offenses, the RPOs, the run option type, pass options, depending on what the defense is doing. And it's to the point where they want the 4 weapons as far as, you know, 3 receivers and a tight end or 4 wide receivers, sometimes empty the backfield with 5 receivers. And instead of like having the extra running back, so, yeah, you only have 3 wide receivers, but with 2 running backs, you keep the defense honest. That, to me, is one of the ways to combat what some of these defenses are doing and the pressure they're able to get on these teams' offenses, especially being able to battle in the trenches and taking advantage of offensive lines. There's ways to combat that. The question will be, moving forward, teams that are struggling in that aspect of it, if they're willing to make that change, add the extra back, take one of the receiving weapons away, but at least you're giving your quarterback time to make better decisions. Because even in the SEC, with the defenders they go up against, even with 3 wide receivers, you still will be able to find some open spots out there, and you'll have the extra time to be able to find them.
No doubt about it. You got to make adjustments, and teams are really they've made an adjustment to Ole Miss right now. They're crowding the line of scrimmage. They're coming after with some up the middle blitzes and doing a lot of things they're doing at Bama right now. And Ole Miss has to make an adjustment to their adjustments. So that's what it's all about. That's why I think that right now there's so many flaws with so many teams in the SEC.
Right.
We could go through them. Auburn, obviously, the quarterback situation there.
Yeah.
Alabama, obviously, the quarterback situation there. Arkansas, the team speed overall doesn't look up to par. A&M, they've got issues all over the place. They got the biggest quarterback killer in the country coaching there at A&M. You go to who else in SEC? Can I think
no
of?
love lost for Jimbo Fisher out of me, by the way. I'm just throwing it out there.
He's gone. This is it for him this season. That's it. You go to I'm trying to think who else in Mississippi State. They've got a new system there. Their offense it looks slow to me, kind of like Ole Miss's secondary overall. Defense is very solid, but they've got some issues over there with that offense. Then you go to the SEC West, Georgia. Breaking in a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. Tennessee, everybody thought this flip over there from one quarterback to the next would be seamless, and it's not. South Carolina got so hyped and they played so well at the end of last year, and then you watch them and they've got some star power, but do they have enough athletes overall? I don't think they do. Vandy is, I really like what the new coach is doing there. I think they're moving in a positive direction, but they're not near where they need to be.
Right.
So who am I missing there? Kentucky. Kentucky, obviously changing quarterbacks there is a big deal. Team speed overall to me is an issue. So I mean, every single team in the SEC, there are issues. And so this is, again, to me, really, some years you got teams that are so good, so stacked at every position that as long as the coach doesn't get in the way, so to speak, they're going to roll. But you don't really have that this year. Georgia, maybe a little bit. Everybody else, it's going to be all about coaching. How much can you hide your weaknesses and expose the other teams? I think this is when you're really going to see who are the best coaches in the SEC. I really do.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And you see a question on here from Bob Weir, one of our listeners out in Red Rocks, Colorado. You may know him.
Hello, Bob.
Hello, Bob. Yancy, are you impressed with the big guy at Tampa, Michael Trigg? How big a part of the offense can he be? And I would say, I would hopefully really big. Remember Franz Beard from GatorbaitMedia.com was on Rebel Yell Hotline a couple of years ago and talked about he watched him play a basketball game down in Tampa when he was in high school. Kid had 42 points. Hell of an athlete.
Yeah, man. Look, Trigg, if he was there mentally as much as he is physically, he would, be a top 10 pick coming up in the draft. But he has just had really a lot of issues, from the neck up, and it affects his consistency. He was running third team this year. Didn't play but a couple snaps in the last 9 games of last season. He hurt his collarbone against Vandy, missed the next 8 games, came back in, got in a little trouble, missed the Mississippi State game, was late for some team meetings, and kind of those issues popped up again this year. He's been in the doghouse more than he's been out, but the talent is obviously there.
Yeah. Interesting. And both of y'all, that list, Yancy went down, Johnny, up and down all 14 SEC teams. The lack of elite quarterback play, and I think it's going to be the teams that can step forward and have an elite quarterback step up, and you got to coach that. I think that's who's going to win the SEC. I'm not saying the league's just completely wide open. I mean, Georgia, until somebody beats them, is the king of the hill. But Alabama's got to go down to Tampa and play South Florida. Remember who the coach at University of South Florida in Tampa is. It's the former, in that Alex English, former offensive coordinator up at Tennessee.
The bottom line is it's time to do some soul searching too. It's not just about the coaches, but it's also about these individuals. They know they have the talent to play the position. The question will be, can they get out of their own heads and be able to get their focus back? And it starts with this week. There's some key games throughout the country this week, not necessarily top 25 matchups, but key games to being able to figure out for players to be able to get some confidence moving forward before things get really intense moving forward. As far as with a lot of these teams, I know Tennessee's playing Florida as far as SEC action, and Georgia's got South Carolina. But, starting next week, everybody's in conference play, especially in the SEC. And this is the time when you fight through this adversity. These are these coaching lessons that now you have to use and put into play with your own play on the field. It's not necessarily the first 3 quarters. It's the final 15 minutes. How are you going to play? It's why you put in all those extra hours in the off season.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the difference on teams that are making runs for conference championships and teams that will all of a sudden be going to 8-4 seasons.
Yeah. Yancy, great stuff, man. I mean, you really broke it down, and that banter with you and Johnny and getting into what Michael Trigg's problems are, because that was a good question from a viewer, someone watching the show, and think about that. It's the mental. It's that 6 inches between your ears. It is always the most important part of it. You can be physically gifted, but if you've got $1 million worth of athletic ability and $1.98 worth of it between the ears, you're going to struggle. Yancy Porter, folks, catch him Monday nights, 6 p.m., Rebel Yell Hotline, Sports 56, WHBQ, and Super Talk, Mississippi. And Yancy, I know you got to go, Johnny, but Yancy, stay on if you can. I love rolling in and doing this because Jordan Hill is going to be on with us next from 24/7 Sports on Georgia. Yancy, but Johnny, tell people real quick how they can keep up with you, all the great work you do, especially on the UMP on Mondays in the smartest city in Alabama. It's the home of Ray Mooring Phil Thompson, and Andy Kelly, and other great people. Huntsville, Alabama. I love that city.
Yeah, I've taken on this complex project. I couldn't have had an easier project, but I'm working on a comprehensive 90th anniversary edition of a book commemorating the Heisman Trophy. And it's not just the winners, but it's all of the top 10 finishers. It's the complete history. And it's interesting how this plays out. But it is taking a lot of time as far as research, though. So wish me luck as I continue that. That's why I'm only doing one show a week now. It's every Monday in the afternoons, 5 to 7, leading into Monday Night Football on Mondays down in my hometown of Huntsville. You can also keep up with all the other things that I post about football and more on Twitter at BP Frank Show.
Real
Johnny,
quick question. Are they staying with Millwood? Are they going to make a change the tie, or what is the feeling around the camp before this weekend for Bama?
Don't be shocked to see more than one quarterback, but the bottom line is I think they're really concerned if they do make the change. That's one of the things about the mental aspect of football. If you make a change like that, do you lose Jalen Milroe for the rest of the year mentally? And that's the thing that you got to be careful about. Because we've seen it time and time. Once again, to me, the problem is not just quarterback. The bigger problem is consistency with that offensive line and just the basics. Stop the stupid penalties and being able to snap the football. I mean, these are the things that have to be corrected.
Yeah, we're up against a hard break, but I'm going to tell you that's great stuff. And Yancy, we're going to get into it. We got Jordan Hill and then Rodney Ortider and Sider on. But Johnny, thank you so much for taking time to join us.
Working on my piano back there. See, I'm working in Music City right there.
There we go. We'll take a quick commercial. We'll be right back. Hour number 2. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys.
Unbelievably, every 2 minutes in our communities, a child is either bought or sold for sex. I am Ari Dickey, board member for the Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. Join me and millions of others in our fight against human trafficking and for its victims by helping to educate the most vulnerable among us, our middle and high school students. Go to nhtcoalition.org, become a partner, and help keep our families safe, because none of God's children are for sale.
All right, Rob Browne back here now with we got Yancy Porter's going to hang on here with us. We've got Jordan Hill, 24/7 Sports over in Athens, and I know you're on a tight schedule, Jordan, and Yancy's going to stay with us for hour number 2. Let's talk about Georgia up to this point. I was down in Orange Beach, got back last night. Tough to come back to the real world, but Georgia's undefeated, and of course, there's people going, "Oh, the offense, this, that, and the other." But break it down for us, man. And thanks for taking time to join us.
Definitely. 2-0, wins over UT Martin and Ball State, nothing too crazy. They've done a very good job across the board with how they've played. I think the biggest concern right now is the run blocking and the run game. I think we're looking for, them to kind of turn the corner in that area. They got a pretty experienced offensive line, new starters at each tackle position. And we talked to Tate Ratledge, the starting right guard, on Monday, and he talked about wanting to see a lot more physicality, wanting to see a lot of room for improvement, and see them make progress. And they're going to get a test against South Carolina on Saturday. A South Carolina defense that hadn't really stood out so far. I'll be interested to see how they handle that. So, I think on the whole, they've done well. There's only so much you can take from playing the teams they played through 2 weeks, but they've done a good job. Carson Beck is taking care of the football. I think the biggest question is really the run game and run blocking, and then seeing if that defensive line, especially Saturday, can get after Spencer Rattler, make him uncomfortable, because they haven't done a ton so far, but they have mixed in several different linemen, and I think it's fair to point that out because they've tried to get a lot of guys reps, and I think it could have looked a little different if you see some of those starters playing a little bit more than they have through 2 weeks.
Yeah, and what has really stood out about Georgia this year is they're going for the three-peat. Besides they're 2-0, which is all that really matters, is the defense looking like they just picked up where they left off last year? Is the offense any different? I mean, Munkin's gone, Bobo's in.
I think the biggest thing to me is the defense. They're just attacking, and the secondary has been outstanding. Malachi Starks made a great play on Saturday against Ball State for an interception. Really, the question for me with this defense, especially going in this week, is what it's going to look like if Javon Bullard does not play. He sprained his ankle against Ball State about midway through that first quarter, didn't come back. Kirby told us on Monday that we won't really know until Wednesday if he will be able to play or not on Saturday. But this defense has done a really good job. I give a lot of credit to Tyke Smith, who has replaced Javon as the starting star in this defense. He's a guy that was an All-American at West Virginia, kind of had to wait his turn at Georgia, and he's done a very good job through 2 weeks. Offense, I think, has looked good. I think Carson Beck really settled in the second game compared to the first game. He's done a very good job of not relying on just one receiver. And we still don't know what it looks like when Lab McConkey's out there because he still hasn't played through these first 2 games dealing with a back injury. But, I think on the whole, there are things that Georgia fans have questions about, areas they want to see improved, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. But I think on the whole, Georgia fans are satisfied with what they've seen, and I think they're ready to see Georgia play an SEC opponent. No disrespect intended to UT Martin and Ball State, but you sort of know what you're signing up for when you're watching those games. And one of the teams is the number 1 team in the nation.
Yeah, Yancy.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, my curiosity from a Georgia perspective is fans get spoiled. We saw it from Alabama. Their fans got spoiled through the run that they had, and now you see a lot more energy from them because they're not winning championships. My question is, are the fans getting spoiled at Georgia? Kind of an uninspiring schedule in front of them this year, and uninspiring to many. Offensive coordinator getting selected, their style of ball. He's Kirby's gone old school. He's gone Saban like we grind it out and play really solid defense. What's the fan enthusiasm right now?
I think there's some enthusiasm. I think if you had any questions, you should have been on the junkyard the Saturday night of the opener when they started really slow against UT Martin. Because let me tell you, fellas, there was a lot of page clicks, a lot of comments on that board as they were sort of finding themselves in that first game. I think it's a situation where I think most Georgia fans are grateful for what has happened the last few years. Waited 41 years for that first championship, turn around and get another. But it has raised the expectations. We did a fan survey before the start of the season, and a lot of people said that they felt like it would be a disappointing season if they didn't make the playoff. Now, you think about only 4 teams are going to make the playoff this year. Georgia, I think, has got a very good shot, especially with the schedule. But to consider, even if Georgia went to the SEC championship game, say they lose, say they don't make the playoff, for people to consider that a disappointing season, a lot of teams would kill for that. But that's sort of the stakes. That's where the bar is for Georgia right now. And I think it's a situation where, especially with the schedule, I can understand why fans are sort of looking for something else or looking ahead, looking to November when they play teams like Ole Miss and Tennessee. But it's just sort of how things broke. I think for the most part, fans understand how special this time is, and they're going to be frustrated. And I know that I've heard a lot about the name Mike Bobo through 2 weeks. I know that's going to continue. But I think for the most part, people understand how special this time is for this program. And I think most of the level-headed ones are going to take it all in and just enjoy it.
So we've talked about the weaknesses for all the teams in the SEC this year. Everybody's got them across the board. What do you see Georgia's this year?
I think right now it's the run game, and I think it's probably more so the running backs because I think it'll come in time as far as the run blocking. But I mean, they played a receiver, Dylan Bell, at running back for a good bit in Saturday's game against Ball State. He had a 21-yard rushing touchdown. They've been beat up there. Dejon Edwards, who I think will wind up being the lead running back, he hasn't played yet. He's been dealing with an MCL injury. Kendall Milton hasn't been 100%. They lost Branson Robinson, who I thought had a chance to have a very good sophomore season. I think they need to just get those guys settled. And I think it's too early to hit the panic button because it's a situation where, they haven't been full health with the guys they expect to have over the long run and for the course of the season. But to me, that's the biggest thing. I mean, I think other than that, still watching to see if they're able to create pressure on the defensive line. Because, even last year when that defense was so good, didn't have a ton of sacks, but they did affect the quarterback. They created havoc, and that's something that Kirby talked about a good bit. When people bring up, hey, Georgia doesn't have guys that wind up leading the nation in sacks, but they get back there to the quarterback. They make the quarterback make mistakes. And for Kirby and that defensive staff, that's just as good as bringing him down to the ground.
Question here. You see a question from Bob Wills, a viewer down in Moultrie, Georgia. Are you confident in Carson Beck as QB? And I guess in a year where Yancy did a great job of chronicling all 14 schools, everybody's got issues. But I think something that really stands out, kind of piggybacking off the question from Bob Wills, is the lack of elite quarterbacks in the league right now. But Georgia, nobody considered, Stetson Bennett, the fourth, is an elite quarterback. And everybody, Tony Barnhart said it best at the Touchdown Club in Memphis, August 28th. He said, 2 years in a row, he speaks at the Terry College of Business at Georgia. He does a preseason speech every year. People come up and grab him. Tony, how are we going to win a national championship with Stetson Bennett? The next year, Tony, how are we going to win a national championship with Stetson Bennett? And then this year, Tony, how are we going to win a national championship without Stetson Bennett? Don't you love fans?
Definitely. And I learned this when I was in Auburn, which I think I knew this, but ain't nobody as popular as a backup quarterback. I can promise you that. But, with quarterback, I feel good about Carson. I'll admit I had my questions after the first game. He looked shaky. He looked nervous, which I think is perfectly fine. His first start since he was a senior in high school, so that had been several years. I thought game 2 he looked a lot more settled in. Made some really nice throws down the field. And what I can gather from people who have been around Carson, he kind of needs a deep throw to sort of settle him in. And I thought second quarter, I believe, he had about a 37-yard throw on the money to Arian Smith. And I thought he kept it going from there. And what I've been impressed with the most, game 1, it really felt like he was leaning on Brock Bowers. It's like, all right, I've had a couple bad plays. I'm going to throw it to 19, kind of get settled in. Really not so much in that second game. He kind of just hit a bunch of different targets. I think Dominic Lovett, Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint had a few throws to Rara Thomas. I think that is the biggest thing that if you're a Georgia fan, I think that should make you feel good is the fact that he's not leaning on just one guy. He's distributing the ball well. He's only had one interception through 2 games, and honestly, it was on Dylan Bell. Dylan kind of bobbled the ball when it was thrown to him, kind of tapped it up in the air, and a Ball State defensive back picked it off and returned it for about 20 or 30 yards. But, yeah, I mean, I'm confident in Carson. I think he's done a good job. I'm still circling that Auburn game at the end of the month because that's going to be his first road test. And even if Auburn, no matter what their record is at that point, it's going to be loud in Jordan-Hare. It's going to be a test, and it's going to be something he's never experienced before as a starter.
Yeah, and Yancy, you're really good at reading these quarterbacks. What's your take so far on Carson Beck? And I mean, they're 2-0, and the guy's pretty damn good. Whoever they put out there, he's got a lot of weapons around him.
Yeah, I studied Carson coming out of high school pretty extensively. I think he's a good, solid, Kirby, smart type of quarterback. He's not a gunslinger, so to speak. He plays it safe. And I think that works kind of well with Kirby Smart's type of offensive philosophy. You got the opposite end of the spectrum, as we talked about last year with Jackson Dart there at Ole Miss, which is like the Brett Favre, the gunslinger that tries to put, the ball in a 1-foot hole 80 yards down the field and takes chances all over the field. And I think Kirby, and that's what works so well with their pass quarterback there. Is, he really comes from that old school Saban style. And look, when Georgia's just they're recruiting the way that Alabama used to recruit, and so you play it safe all over the field, and that I think he's a good fit for that.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, it was interesting to hear Kirby talk about it just through a couple weeks that he's really level-headed, that he never is, arguing on the sideline or yelling at guys. He said he's just cool, calm, and collected. And it's good to see that through 2 games. And it'll be big if Georgia finds itself in some close games. You can't have that quarterback panicking back there. Or like Yancy said, I mean, you're going to wind up with someone who's going to make mistakes and put the defense in bad situations on the other side. So that I think is the biggest thing for me. I want to see Carson get put in a couple tough situations just to see how he responds. He's never had to do it before.
Yeah, and
It-
that's the thing that could hurt Georgia this year. It's the schedule. It's just not. It's not very tough, to be frank, and they don't have a lot of potholes on the road to go through to really prep them for that playoffs run. And so there could be some. They're not. I don't know if they're going to really be prepped, so to speak, going into the playoffs like they have been the last couple of years. And maybe that's because Georgia's just gotten so good, and it seems like everybody else you play is not very good. I know Alabama went through that themselves, but I just don't see many potholes on the road for that schedule for Georgia.
Definitely, and I'll just say, that's why I've sort of circled November, because you got Ole Miss. I think it's November 11th, and then at Tennessee on November 18th, and you got to be healthy by then, because you think about how long the schedule is and how daunting. If you're missing some key guys in those games, it's not crazy to think either one of those teams could beat Georgia, or at the very least give them a good game. So yeah, it's a very interesting schedule, and I think I've talked about it on here before with Rob. This is the type of schedule, especially when you see Texas and USC, and you already have teams like Ohio State and Florida State and Michigan. You can't really afford to lose in the regular season. I mean, if Georgia loses a game in the regular season, it's not guaranteed that they can make the playoff, even if they win out from there. So it's going to be really fascinating just to see how they navigate the schedule and where they sort of stand once we get really, really talking about what the playoff picture looks like.
And another question here, a lot of people are texting me or they send comments in, so I'm trying to keep up with all of them. There's a lot of them coming in. Dash Riprock, love that one. Smyrna, Georgia, right by the Battery. Talk about the depth in the running back room for Georgia, because, I mean, look, who's had a better running back room consistently for decades than Georgia? And that's always kind of a safety valve for a quarterback, and is as a great defense, which they already have.
Definitely. Got a couple seniors, Dejan Edwards, who has not played yet this year with an MCL, but Kirby said the last couple weeks he could have played if they needed him, and I mean, they just haven't needed him against UT Martin or Ball State. Kendall Milton, who I think deserves a ton of credit, been dealing with a hamstring injury, and he basically told Kirby, look, I'm not 100%, but I want to play, and he's played the last couple weeks and made some plays along the way. Andrew Paul, a redshirt freshman, he's a guy that really wowed in the fall camp 2 years ago, wound up tearing his ACL and worked his way back. They've got Cash Jones, a walk-on who's turned heads. And as I mentioned, Dylan Bell, who's a sophomore, he's a wide receiver, and he's a guy that they've wound up, giving him a few carries here and there. He's worked at the running back room and has shown flashes. And the other guy I would say is Roderick Robinson, who may wind up having, I have to look, he's got either the most carries or the second most carries through 2 weeks. And he's looked really impressive. He's like 235, 240 pounds, big back. A guy that back in the spring, Kendall Milton told him, better not add any more weight, buddy. They're going to play you at fullback if you keep getting bigger. But very physical running back, a guy out from San Diego who ran for 1,000,000 yards last season as a high school senior. So they've got options. They really just need to get those guys back to full health and be able to lean on several different guys once we go through the course of the season.
In other words, Rob, they got 2 or 3 guys you'll be watching in the NFL one day.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Jordan, I got to say this, man. And this is a question that came from a viewer. Is Kirby going to keep that job as a bank teller at Regions? I saw him on the commercial.
I really want to ask him how many takes it took. He had the annoyed teller working on something down. He did a pretty good job. Now. I will say this, and I showed this to someone the other day. He's not topped the Nick Saban. I don't know if you remember the Regions commercial where he's talking the woman out of buying a dress. It's flawless, 10 out of 10. Yes. Nick he crushed that one.
He did. He goes, you $750 on a dress. You're going to wear maybe 2-3 times tops. She goes, yeah. He goes, you're probably right. He goes, yeah, I am. I mean, I love it. Look, I know you're on a tight schedule. Real quick, recruiting, Georgia. They choose, really. That's just what they do. They're the 4th most talent-rich state in America. Any recruiting updates? That's a question from Paul Wickenheiser. We call him the Burgermeister, listening out in Reno, Nevada. Homesick dog, grew up around Atlanta. Man, he can bark like very few dogs I know. He's a DGD, I'll say that, but he had that question.
27 commits in the 2024 class. They added one Sunday night and a 4-star from Virginia, Chris Cole, a linebacker. They've got 3 linebackers. I'm amazed, y'all, that they have gotten the caliber of inside linebacker they got this year after getting Raylan Wilson, C.J. Allen, and Troy Bowles a year ago. I kind of wrote the position off and said, well, they loaded up in 23. They may get 1, maybe 2. But they've got 3 outstanding inside linebackers again. It's unbelievable at what they've been able to do specifically at that position. But, yeah, they're in good shape. There's a few other guys they're still chasing. A couple defensive linemen, I think, are the biggest targets. And still going to try to go get a big-time receiver. I'm not convinced they'll be able to do that. But, yeah, 27 commits, and we are in, I guess, mid-September. They have done a very good job of sort of wrapping things up early and, not a lot of guessing when it comes to this recruiting class, but we got so much other stuff to talk about. I guess we'll be okay.
Yeah, look, this is just an awesome time of the year. I mean, and you know what's crazy? I'm not sure what's more fun, the build up to the season or the season, because everywhere you go, it's what everybody wants to talk about. But Jordan, as always, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. It means a hell of a lot to us. A lot of listeners, viewers all over the country depend on you for their dog coverage. And also, you know, the rest of college football. Let people know how they can follow you, keep up with all your great work.
Definitely. Dogs247.com, on Twitter at Jordan Davis Hill, on Twitter at Dogs247. So, yeah, getting ready for the first SEC game. A lot of excitement, a lot of fun stuff to talk about. And quite honestly, I'm just ready for 3:30 on Saturday and to see what Georgia's able to do.
Oh, hell, we all are, man. Hey, have a great day. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate you guys.
You bet, man. All right, that is Jordan Hill, 24/7 Sports. Let's do this. Let's take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. Yancy Porter, love it having him stay on with us. About 10 minutes, Rodney Orr, Tyler Insider will check in with us. We'll get a breakdown. Rodney, absolutely an intellectual giant when it comes to covering this stuff. He really does. He'll break it down. He'll tell you the truth. He's a truth broker. I think he's good at that. Yancy, love your takes. Great questions. We'll be right back.
Unbelievably, every 2 minutes in our communities, a child is either bought or sold for sex. I am R.A. Dickey, board member for the Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. Join me and millions of others in our fight against human trafficking and for its victims by helping to educate the most vulnerable among us, our middle and high school students. Go to nhtcoalition.org, become a partner, and help keep our families safe, because none of God's children are for sale. Unbelievably, every 2 minutes.
All right, Rob Brown back here with you. Yancy Porter and I having a lot of fun talking college football. How can you not? Yancy, hearing that take about Georgia, I think a lot of schools are like, Ole Miss, that was a good one to go on the road and play at Tulane. He's right about 2:30 Central Saturday, 3:30 South Carolina coming to town. Ole Miss, though, let's talk about this Georgia Tech game a little bit more. Last year, Ole Miss went over to Atlanta across the street on I-85, one of the most beautiful settings in college football. All the big, skyscrapers around Grant Field, Bobby Dodd Stadium, won like 42-0, 42-7. Georgia Tech, with Key as the coach, looks like they care. And this is not going to be an easy game Saturday. On paper, it doesn't look like it.
No, and I think it's really for Ole Miss's sake. It's more about working on themselves. They, like I said, they've got to. You return everybody on offense that blocked for the number 2 rushing attack in the country last year, including your star running back and quarterback. And now you're averaging right at 100 yards a game, where you averaged over 330 last year rushing the ball. So it just doesn't make any sense. You bring in a new offensive coordinator. He gets rid of the zone blocking, and he plays 2 guys that he recruited out of the portal over 2 returning starters. And so, do they make the change back to the guys that were so highly going into this year that have not been playing the first two games there, and Eli Acker and Jaden Williams, or do they continue to play these two portal guys from Washington, Victor Korn, and from UAB, Quincy McGee? I think that's the number one question. Dart's playing really, really good right now. If they didn't have Jackson Dart against Tulane, they lose that game and probably lose it pretty handily, to be honest. Dart's playing at a very high level. Everybody expected him to make that jump from year one to year two in Lane's system, and he has. I think he's going to play at a high enough level where he'll go in the NFL draft this year, and he's really made that jump that they had hoped. So the ingredients and the talent are there to fix things on the offensive line. Dart's made that jump that you want to there at quarterback. And the receivers, Trey Harris is as good as anybody in the country right now, but then he goes down with an undisclosed knee injury. Nobody knows if he's going to play this weekend. Everybody's speculating that they're going to sit him out and get him ready for the Bama game. Then they're losing Franklin, their number two receiver, has not played up to this point from UTSA, the All-American there out of the transfer portal they got. And then their top two tight ends are hurt, and Creascorn and Hudson Wolf. So, you got your top two receivers, your top two tight ends. In the tight end situation there, really with Creascorn, that can give you some help there in the run game, is really hurting Ole Miss. And he's missed the first two games. Again, they're speculating that they're going to hold him and save him for Alabama. We'll see if he comes back. Like Alabama making a change there at quarterback and kind of getting the wrinkles ironed out before you get SEC play with Ole Miss. I think it would be a little bit more soothing if Ole Miss could play some of these guys that haven't played up to this point, and kind of get their feet wet and get them ready instead of just throw them out there against Alabama. But we'll see. So I think the injuries to those guys, do they come back this week? Do they save them for the Alabama week? Do they, go back and the personnel changes and go back to their starters at left tackle and left guard from the last couple of years? Are all questions that will be answered Saturday.
Yancy, great takes. And here's a question from Milburn Drysdale in Buckatuna, Mississippi. Love that town on Highway 45, and I call the land that time forgot on the way to Orange Beach. Talk about what Ole Miss can do to get Quinshon Judkins, QJ, more opportunities for big runs. And you mentioned he's only averaging about 3.6 yards per carry up to this point.
Well, again, I think going back to your two, you're on the left side, your left guard and your left tackle, getting your personnel that was so successful last year back into the lineup would do wonders. Again, getting Prescorn at tight end, who's your big traditional 6'6", 260-pound tight end that can really block and expose the middle of the field to loosen up, because they're just stacking the box right now, trying to shut down the run game. And they're having troubles on the offensive line, and so that's allowing to get pressure on Dart. So they're going to have to make some adjustments, make some quick hitters, slow down the defensive pass rush, open the lanes back up for Judkins, because right now when he gets the ball, there's literally about 1 foot. He takes 1 foot down, and he's dodging two people, and you just can't run the ball like that.
Yeah, and as great a player as he was last year as a freshman, this is what happens. I mean, people get a book on you and what you like to do, what your good tendencies, what your bad tendencies are. But really, you referenced it a minute ago. You lose Jake Thornton, offensive line coach. He goes over to Auburn, young 30-year-old coach. It looked like in the first game, offensive line was improved for Auburn. Didn't get a whole lot of surge against Cal. Maybe Cal's better than people thought. I thought that would be a tough game. You mentioned Ole Miss's coach coming in from NC State. Let's talk about what he can do better that he's got to do with the offensive line for these upcoming games starting Saturday with the Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech.
Rob, I don't mean to be too hard on Garrison, but he's got to do everything better.
I like your honesty.
The joke is that, I hope he didn't unpack his U-Haul because he'll need to get his clothes up and everything come November, and he's going to be somewhere else. Because I mean, honestly, they just look ill prepared, not very well coached. Came in and changed the system of zone blocking that Kiffin has used his whole career everywhere he's been. It's not working. He looks to be playing favoritisms there with his 2 portal additions over, a guy that was a preseason All-American there, Jaden Williams there at left tackle. It looks like he's doing nothing right to this point.
Yeah, and that's something that Lane Kiffin is not going to tolerate. I mean, and wasn't Ole Miss last year one of the top 3 or 4 teams in college football running the football? People forget
number 2
how good they are.
30 yards a game.
How many?
330 yards a game.
That's incredible. And I think
they were behind Navy or Army, whichever one.
Okay,
remember, or Air Force, one of the academy teams.
Yeah, and as good as those stats are, there's only been one SEC team in history to lead the nation in rushing, and I think that was Auburn in 2013, and an Ole Miss had more yards last year than that Auburn team had average per game in 2013. That is such an underrated fact about Ole Miss.
Yeah, Lane, that's why he has success passing the ball, is because the bread and butter is always going to be running the ball. And so this is something different. I mean, it's, Lane has a lot of success every season wherever he's been running the ball. And so this is unique for Lane having these troubles. And it's really interesting that he brought in an offensive line coach that uses different blocking schemes than he's used his whole life. And I think that's really something that hasn't been talked about much. That is really a big issue right now.
Yeah, and let's talk about real quick before Rodney Orr joins us. Georgia Tech, offense, defense, the line of scrimmage. It gets down to that. We're talking about it right now. What is it about Georgia Tech that has you most concerned? And if you were an Ole Miss football coach, would keep you up there watching tape till 2 or 3 in the morning, which is probably par for the course anyway.
The speed of their offensive skill players. I think they got some positive matchups with the Ole Miss secondary that they can take advantage of. That's what would have me the most stayed up. The offensive line is in their hands. They can go back to the personnel they used last year and really. They can go back to some different techniques on their blocking schemes right now. So that's in their hands. The lack of speed in the secondary, they wanted to get bigger, longer, stronger back there on the back end, and they did. I mean, there's a bunch of pretty looking athletes back there, but there's some stiff hip guys too, and that would be my biggest concern this Saturday if I'm Lane Kiffin.
All right, let's do this. Let's switch gears now. And great takes, Yancy Porter. Another one of the great guys out there, Rodney Orr, Tider Insider. It's only $48 a year. If you want to be an insider with the Crimson Tide, keep up with all that's going on, and there's a lot going on there, you've got to be a subscriber to Tider Insider. And also catch Rodney Orr and Gary Harris Tuesday nights, 6:30 p.m. on YouTube, in Tider Insider TV. 30 minutes of red meat content on the Crimson Tide with 2 of the best journalists around there. Rodney, that was a hell of a game Saturday night, but you've been breaking this down, the buildup of where Alabama's strengths and weaknesses were. Didn't work out. 34-24, Texas gets the win. We've seen Alabama lose before and come back in 2015, in 2017, and win the national championship after conference losses. And the buzzards were out there, singing funeral dirges, the dynasty's over, and they were proven wrong. Do you see a similar season working out this year, or are there just too many problems? What's your take up to this point with Alabama? And I'll tell you when Rodney come back with us. Breaker 19, how about you out there? Yancy, we lost you on the double nickel. I don't know what happened. That was a series of questions. Maybe it was just too much for the internet to take. It just blew the fuse. But Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
Rodney's one of the few people. I got in the business back in 1999.
yeah.
There was Jamie Newberg, Scott Kennedy. There was no such thing as Rivals and 247 Sports or
Yeah.
even Scout.com at that time. And I think he was around when I first started. And I talked to some of my old friends in the business and, just all the changes. And he's one of the last Mohicans. It was too much for me. Year 28, I was, I still do it, but not full time like I used to. So, I've got a lot of respect for that guy.
Oh yeah, but what you do is like me, when we're doing it, we make it count, and we have our relationships and our contacts and all, and we study this stuff scientifically. I study all this stuff like I do the financial markets, and that's, I mean, it's a ton of time that we both put in. And then Rodney with Tighter Insider and that staff that he has, and that show he and Gary Harris do. It's an incredible show. We got him back. We were saying good things about Rodney, and the football gods, the web gods brought him back. But Yancy and I were going to ask you this question. Your takeaways from that game Saturday night, everything that you talked about, concerns, questions, and all, they were issues during the game, and how you going to fix them? Let's talk about it with Rodney or Tighter Insider.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, before you lost me, I think you were mentioning, is this a team that can bounce back, maybe win a national championship? I mean, it's still really early to me. I mean, I don't think I see that in this team today. I mean, there's a long way to go, but I remember 2015 when they lost that Ole Miss game and all hell broke loose the following week. I mean, it was like the world was collapsing here in Tuscaloosa, and, nobody saw any light at the end of the tunnel, and you saw what happened. They rolled through the rest of the season, won the national championship. Derrick Henry won the Heisman. I don't see that right now in this team, but, who knows? I mean, we talked about the things that you mentioned there, some of the concerns heading into the season. This is a really young team in a lot of positions on defense, some up front offensively. I think it's going to take a little time for them to develop cohesiveness up front. I think the big thing, too, is, we heard a lot of really good things about Jalen Milroe, but we also heard the inconsistencies that were there. These are things that have plagued him. If you go back and look at the first start he had against Texas A&M, and again, it was the first start a year ago. It's obviously a very difficult challenge he faced in that game, but he still has the same struggles. He turns the ball over. He's not recognizing defenses. He's throwing into double and triple coverages at times. And, a lot of people say, well, you're not running the right system for him. Well, I really don't know, because, I mean, again, it's pretty basic. You don't throw into double or triple coverage, regardless of what system you're in. So I think there's obviously an issue at quarterback. And again, I don't know if they stick with Milroe, if they make a change. I think Tyler Buckner, the transfer from Notre Dame, got a lot of reps with the ones yesterday. He's gotten a lot of ones with the reps since he's been here. Will they ultimately make a change? I mean, that'd only be speculation on my part, but I think it's certainly a consideration.
And to me, Rodney, the thing with Alabama is people are talking about the offensive line woes, and yes, they're there, no doubt about it. But when you have a one-read quarterback, you're going to have offensive line woes.
100%.
It just multiplies the problems because everybody's stuffing the line of scrimmage, bringing in the DBs and the linebackers, and everybody gets closer and closer and closer and says, hey, beat us through the air. And then you start bringing more people than you can account for and block. And it snowballs. So right now, I told this earlier with the previous guest, is Alabama. I mean, there's undoubtedly you make the change this weekend against South Florida. You see what the next quarterback. I think Simpson's the guy, but I don't know. But I would put in Ty Simpson and see what he does well, doesn't do well, and really game plan starting for the SEC play starting next week with the Ole Miss. You can't do that next week in the SEC against Ole Miss. You got to do that this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, look, I think Ty has all the tools. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't know that Ty's ready to be that guy right now. I think, again, he still needs to continue to mature as a player. And I mean, sometimes that you say, well, then you have to get him on the field and allow that to happen. Right now, I would guess, because again, like I said, Tyler Buckner got a lot of the first reps in this last practice here yesterday. Tyler Buckner's probably the guy I would keep an eye on for now, in terms of maybe if they make a change. But Ty Simpson, certainly, he's very, very capable. There's no question that Ty Simpson has a ton of talent. And look, the true freshman, Dylan Lonergan, might be the most potentially gifted of all the group. So, but I don't see that happening, Lonergan. But, if they get to that point, that's probably not a very good sign.
Yeah. Look, if Saban can even sniff a national championship this year, he needs to be coach of the year. I don't see it this year. I really don't. That's from a neutral party watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
There were things in place, including the best running back in the country there in Henry in 15.
Absolutely. That's 100% correct.
They got too many issues, but they've got to go with a true passing quarterback to relieve that offensive line stress. They don't have that big dominant running back that they've had in the past years, so they got to go with the guy that can really throw the ball around the field. Whether Simpson's ready or not, I believe the other option is more tailor made towards the offense we're seeing right now, which is a lot of running plays and things of that nature, which you're going to keep those defenses really pressing and sending more players than they can block for. So I think you've got to put in a true passing quarterback in that system.
Well, and you may prove correct there. I'm certainly not contesting that. But here's the thing about Tyler Buckner that I think may be a little different than Milroe. I think he brings an intermediate passing game that can be consistent, that can hit throws, and he can occasionally hit a deep ball. He's not going to be a down the field guy, obviously, on a consistent basis. But I mean, I do think he can hit the intermediate throws, and he's a very athletic kid, obviously. This is something Milroe doesn't do. I mean, they have not had an intermediate passing game. Now, he did hit a couple of throws, intermediate routes, that were wildly thrown, I would say. Benson made a great catch over the middle. But I mean, again, I just who knows? I mean, I'm with you right now. I mean, it's kind of, there's still a lot of things that I think you have to kind of let them unfold and see how they play out. But I don't see Alabama right now being the team that some people projected in the preseason.
Yeah, and what's so surprising about that? One more thing, and then I'll let you.
No, keep going. Ian. This is good stuff.
In high school, you see teams put in the best athlete on the team and put them there at quarterback, and that's exactly what Alabama's done. And I told Rob this is the most surprising move, the most critical point I would have with Nick Saban during, not out of Alabama, but LSU, Miami, wherever he's been, besides not picking up Drew Brees there. But why in the world they would, go the high school route and put your best athlete at quarterback when you're a one read quarterback like Milroe? You're going to have a doubt. You're going to be able to hit some bombs, right? I mean, he can scramble around on busted plays and just chunk it down the field and make a couple. But if you're not having that intermediate passing game like you're speaking about, it just crowds that box. And then all of a sudden, I mean, you got 8 guys to block for with 5 linemen. And it's helter-skelter.
Well, and like I said this on our show yesterday, that someone asked about, the quarterback situation. And I said, look, there's one thing Alabama fans need to understand. There's not a Tua waiting in the background. And what I mean by that is in 2017, when Hurts struggled to manage a first down against the better defenses, you knew that Tua, you saw what Tua could do with his arm. You knew the talent he had. And, everyone knew it was just a matter of that opportunity. Well, I'm not saying Dylan Lonergan can't be really good. I'm not saying Ty Simpson can't be really good. And I'm not saying that Buckner could not be a great leader and do some really good things right now. But they're not Tua. They're not going to step in and rescue this team and save the team, I don't think. So that's where I say, and that's why I say that I don't see this Alabama team maybe achieving some things that people had hoped. And you're 100% right, by the way. Not having a quarterback, that affects everything. It affects the offensive line, it affects the receivers, it affects the running game, it affects the defense. I mean, look, Texas had 13 points going in the fourth quarter. Really, the defense had only given up 10. Kevin Steele had done a fantastic
And Rodney, that game was in the fourth quarter. It was still in play.
defense. Texas was not concerned.
Yeah, Texas was struggling. I mean, and Rodney, we come back on. Yeah. Well, I mean,
last week that all they wanted to do was really they were going to challenge Milroe to throw the football.
Yeah, and crowd the line of scrimmage and just say, "Hey, beat us with your arm. You got to prove that." And that's the oldest defensive playbook around. Yeah, I mean, Yancy. I mean, I guess we're having some trouble with Rodney, but that is whenever you've got a quarterback that people don't think has the arm or the accurate arm. Certainly, he's got a strong arm and he throws a beautiful deep ball.
Sure.
But I go back and Rodney, jump in when you're back on. But I know Cole Kubelik said this on SEC Network, and he said, look, I would say this. He pointed it out. Rodney, and Cole Kubelik said they were talking with Zach Mettenberger, who's on the staff now at Alabama in some capacity, former Georgia quarterback. What you'll see with Jalen Milroe is, did you see that? And then there's, did you see what he just did? That kind of stuff, Rodney. I mean, it's interesting. Rodney, let me say this. We got a question from a viewer right now. Buddy Epson in Saraland, Alabama. Is the Alabama offensive line capable of improving in time for SEC play? And Uncle Jed just wanted to add something. Uncle Jed there, man. But what do you think, Rodney? Rod, I'm going to tell you what. Hey, Yancy, 2 years ago, back in the fall preseason of 21, Rodney talked about this offensive line on paper, how talented they were. He said, but they've still got to prove it. And I look at the size of this offensive line. And, Rodney, that's a good question from Buddy Epson. Can they improve? They got to go. And nobody's talking about the game Saturday against South Florida. What can they do better quickly, because SEC play is right around the corner?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, really honestly, whether they'll make some personnel moves in terms of maybe inserting TJ Ferguson in at right guard where Dalcourt is right now. Is that a possibility? Yeah, maybe so. I don't know that there's going to be any other personnel moves, but I would say this. I thought they were gashing Texas early in the game right up the middle, but it goes back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. You got to be able to do more than that. The game has changed. You've got to have a quarterback who can, take advantage in the passing game. And so I'm not really down on the offensive line in that regard. I do think that pass protection, and we talked about it on your segment, Rob. We talked about it for weeks and weeks about the left tackle spot, that Caden Proctor, a true freshman, was going to need some help. He was going to need some help. And I think we saw that Saturday against Texas. They're going to have to find a way to get him some help, in pass protection at times, because he's developing in that area. Scott's going to be a great player. It's going to be a great player, but it's just a matter of, development. And I just don't think right now he's where he needs to be as a pass protector.
Yeah, and I think that this all goes back to quarterback in there that can elevate some of the problems they're having and get 5-on-5 instead of 8 against 5.
Exactly.
Issue with the offensive line right now, and bringing in another quarterback that can throw the quick hitters, that can throw the intermediate passes, that can get the ball out of his hands quickly and read defenses would do wonders for their offensive line and let players like their left tackle grow into that role. I think that's the biggest. Look, most fans and media put way too much on the quarterback, right? But in this case with Alabama, it really does come down to that because they don't have the Henry style running back. The offensive line is not ready. They don't have the one or two big time studs take the top off of the type receivers. They're not built for the quarterback playing right. It's just
That right. No,
you're fitting a square peg in a round hole right now in Alabama.
that's a great assessment. And let me just say this too. Nick Saban sometimes will tell you a lot of things if you'll just listen. To what he says. And Rob, he said this, and when he said it very early in August camp, it's caught my attention. He said, you guys think that whoever trots out there as the quarterback in that first game means he's going to be the guy. And he said, that doesn't mean that at all. Well, Nick Saban, when he makes a comment like that, that's not a typical Saban comment. And he pounded on that a few times. He was sending a message that, guys, we're not going to be settled at quarterback early in the season. And we see that right now. He said yesterday, he made a couple of comments. He said, first of all, and he said it twice. He said, I'll be shocked. And he emphasized shocked. I'll be shocked if our players don't respond the right way. I'll be shocked if our team doesn't do everything it's capable of doing to improve. So that told me that Saban does believe there are some things. And then he made this comment. He said, these things are very fixable. So it tells me that he feels like he's got some solutions to the things that are going on. So my guess is, and again, I'm speculating here, you guys can tell me what you think, but I'm speculating that Nick Saban's saying, you know what, we may eventually make this change at quarterback, and I think it can help us in a lot of ways. That's just the way I kind of take it.
Yeah, I think you're on. I mean, and Rodney, when you speak and you point out what Nick Saban does, he's speaking through the media vicariously to his team. That's how he does it. Here's another question. Otis Sistrunk in Pine Level, Alabama. I like that little town south of Montgomery.
Otis
Sistrunk.
Yeah.
So Howard Cosell used to call his head when it would be steam coming off of the University of Mars. Rodney, how much does Alabama miss defensive line coach Bo Davis? And will Saban try to hire him back and put the band back together? Because I said it earlier in the show, Rodney Garner and Bo Davis, to me, two of the elite defensive line coaches in all of college football. And I saw him giving Coach Saban a hug after the game, but he's on that Texas sideline, and you can see the improvement on that Longhorn defensive line.
Oh, he's done an amazing job. To me, Bo Davis, you mentioned elite. I think Bo Davis is the best defensive line coach in America. He's did an incredible job here at Alabama. He and Nick Saban, have a great relationship. As far as the future goes, I really don't know what's going to happen. I would not rule out that necessarily right now. I certainly think it could be a possibility that, if Nick Saban decided to make a change on the defensive line, that he would be a guy. But that is an area, the defensive line, quite frankly, that just hasn't shown a lot of development. And, again, this isn't just me commenting on this, Rob and Yancy. This is, talking to NFL defensive line coaches that have coached on the college level, that know what, and longtime NFL defensive line coaches now that are out of coaching, that they observe Alabama's defensive line, and they're still kind of scratching their heads about some of the lack of development. And again, I'm not trying to bang on Freddie Roach. I know Freddie's a former player; he's a great guy. Everyone likes Freddie Roach, and I don't know what the issues are. I can't put my finger on them, but at the same time, something's not kind of progressing on that defensive line.
Yancy,
I knew
critical.
Freddie well when he was at Ole Miss, and a great guy, a good recruiter. I'm not close enough over there to know what the issues like you are, Rodney. I really don't. I know Bo Davis, being compared to Bo Davis is kind of like being compared to Saban as a head coach, right? I mean, it's just
I agree. Yeah,
it's not very fair because Bo is as good as a coach as he is, he's even a better recruiter. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of like Saban. I mean, you just there's no weaknesses with Bo Davis, and I it doesn't surprise me he's sorely missed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you're right. I mean, again, he's the to me he's the elite defensive line coach in America.
Yeah,
I wonder why he left Alabama to begin with. That would be
well, they had an issue. It was NCAA related, the bump
I got you.
rule.
Yeah.
It was related to the bump rule. It's really something that's very silly, actually. And there was some things that happened with that, along with that kind of. But now let me just say this: people, Alabama fans ask, is he free to come back? Bo Davis is free to come back. Bo Davis could. I mean, there's nothing compliance wise that's keeping him from returning to Alabama.
Yeah, it'd be stupid if there is, since there's literally no rules now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, look, man, guys, unfortunately we've run out of time, but golly, awesome show. And most often we see the face of Christ in the least among us. And what does that mean? Go out every day when you're out and about. Remember what positive words and kind deeds can do to change lives. Think about that in everything that you do. We are the most blessed people and the most blessed nation in the history of the world. Act like it, America. Grab hold of success, embrace it, and share it with others. You're shrinking to make other people around you feel less insecure is a disservice. Remember that. Rodney Orr, Tighter Insider, folks, $48 a year. Let them know how they can follow you. And, of course, Yancy Porter, catch him Monday nights, 6 p.m., Sports 56 WHBQ, Super Talk, Mississippi. Yancy, I listened to y'all on the way home from Orange Beach, Alabama. God, my wife was like, we got to move back. We got to move down here. It's so awesome. But listening to Sports Talk the whole way back, it was incredible. But, Rodney, let them know how they can follow you. And, Yancy, always hang on. And Rodney, I love it when we roll these guests into one another. It's like Austin City Limits when, they just grab people out of the band. Let's get Waylon and Willie up here. Let's get Jesse Coulter. But this is awesome stuff. Thanks, everybody, our sponsors, our listeners, and everybody. And, Rodney, tag us out, and we'll do it again tomorrow. Rodney. Oh, we lost. Rodney, are you there? Okay. Well, well, Rodney, Yancy, everybody, great show. We're out of here, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.